And I see this evening that there's, I don't know, is there, how many is it in here that have not yet bowed the knee to Baal? All. That's our prayer. A brother challenged me downstairs that I have to come up with a title. He made my message almost disappear. I don't know where you are, brother. You pray for me that I come up with a good one. I would like to peruse the patriarchs a bit. I would like to discuss a little bit the walk of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their walk. So you can pick their walk or their perusing. I'd like to read to you a text in Genesis 48. I'm no revivalist. I'm no apologist. I don't know what I am. I'm just a brother that muses upon the things in the scriptures, and I come up with conclusions. For those of you that are bent on having all the Bible verses find a slot in their theological drawer to put them in, this evening's message is really going to be against the grain. I'm going to do something that I'd slap a preacher if he did it. So I'm going to do it. I'd like you to think with me this evening, and I'm saying that by way of introduction. The other thing I want you to know this evening, that I'm going to be saying a lot of things that I pray to God that you have a good memory and a good grasp of the book of Genesis. As I'm relating, I shall not take the time and quote all the verses. I'm going to go from memory and assume that if I paraphrase things, your memory will fill in the slots and you'll see where I'm going. And I'm hoping this evening that as I muse in front of you, it's really all I will be doing. I will be meditating out loud. And my hopes are this evening that somewhere in that meditation you find yourself. My goal this evening is to speak to us as saints and hopefully in some measure help us to identify where we're at on the map. Where we're at on the map. Where can I find myself? I'd like to read to you, first of all, just by way of introduction here, my closing verse. The last verse that I had originally planned on reading, but it's my weakness. I change my message when I get up here. But I'm going to read this one to you. This is a really good scripture. You got to understand this one. This is Genesis 48. Joseph is before his dad. And he's bringing his two sons before his dad so his dad can bless them. But I'd like you to see what he said here. This is when I was meditating upon this afternoon, it so captured my mind that inspired what I was going to say here for the remainder of the evening. In verse 15, he says these words, "And he blessed Joseph." That is, Jacob blessed Joseph. And here's what Jacob said. Here's the quote. Here's what he said. God, that's a good way to begin a sentence, okay? That is a good way to start a sentence. God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk. God. God before whom my fathers. God before. Emphasis on the before. In front of. In the face of. This word could also be translated in His face, in His presence. God before whom my fathers. This is Jacob speaking. God before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, did walk. The God which fed me all my life long, unto this day. Unto this day. The angel which redeemed me from all evil. The angel. Who is the angel? The angel which redeemed me from all evil. Bless the lads. And I just want to stop right there. The angel which redeemed me from all evil. The angel. This is an old man, 130 years old, saying these words. And then he gives up the ghost, and they have his funeral. And he passes away to meet the God before whom he walked. Now, some years later, God meets Moses by a burning bush in the book of Genesis. And God identifies Himself as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Certainly you will have noticed that the connection of those three in one verse comes up frequently in the Mosaic writings. It is interesting for us this evening because I feel in some sense when we peruse the lives of these men and we look at their lives, somewhere as we look at their lives, we see ourselves. We see our own journey, our own walk. Or as Jacob said it in chapter 47, where I think it was chapter 47. Yes, in chapter 47 of Genesis, verse 9, Jacob is now before Pharaoh. This is just before the other one, where he says, the days of the years of my pilgrimage. The days of the years of my pilgrimage, or journeyings. The word means, of course, you are not in this home in this country, and you're just passing through. Well, not passing through. You're camping about. And that's what I'd like to see. I think at various stages, you and I are on this walk. We're on the walk. We are pilgrims. We are pilgrims. Even if we sometimes scold each other or challenge each other to see if that is really true, whether we are, and sometimes we don't believe we are. We're so at home on planet Earth that we wonder sometimes if we are. And I wonder if I peruse through these men's lives that whether that was sometimes the case too. Now in the book of Hebrews, the Hebrew writer tells us that Abraham was looking for a city, correct? He was looking for a city whose builder and maker was God. Abraham looked for a city. And as I analyze the lives of these three men, the truth is that God was working on this man all those years of his pilgrimage, making him a building block in the city. As God is building the city, the New Jerusalem, and Abraham himself would become an integral part of the city. I'll let you muse on that one. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. Now the Lord had said to Abraham, before he was Abraham, the Lord had said to him while he was just Abram. And he had told him, so originally Abraham was an Iraqi. He was from the Middle East, and he died in the Middle East. And he was just south of that geographical spot where Nimrod built the Tower of Babel. Not far, with the type of means of travels, that we have today, it's not that far. Less than from here to my home in Alberta. But God had said to Abraham, leave thy family, leave your kindred, leave your father's house, and go unto a land that I will show you. And as we look at ourselves here this evening, some of us can very clearly relate to that. I can for myself. I can very clearly relate to that. I remember it very clearly, the call of God upon my life to leave. And when I became a Christian, I very literally, physically said bye to my family, my blood family. You see, my blood family did not embark on this journey that I've been on for many years now. They decided to stay in Ur of the Chaldees. And I have lost track of them. I don't know where they all are these days. I don't go back there and see them often. Some of you know what that's like. You remember the time when God called you and drew you to Himself, where God was placing you on a journey. Some of you remember the call, the heartbeats, the throbbings, as the call of God became clear to you, whether you were in the colony or whether you had already left or wherever you came from. And God began to call you to Himself. Now, in the fullest sense, verse 2 of Genesis 12 is to Abraham and to Christ. But in a lesser degree, I think even that is applicable to us, where God says, I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thy name and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. The full realization of that came in the person of Jesus Christ. I don't think that we dispute that. The full realization of what God was saying here was realized in the person of Jesus Christ. But even prior to Christ, the nation of Israel, in her great corruption, was already a blessing. The Word of God came through them. The prophets of God that have given to us the oracles of God came from this man, Abraham. So long before Christ, long before the advent of Christ, Abraham's blessing was already moving into different areas and benefiting many, many people, let alone his own family tree, his own posterity. God called Abraham, and God has called you. The call to follow Christ, or the call to follow God, is in reality just like this one. Jesus did say, if a man will not leave father, mother, brother, sister, even lands, he goes on to say, if you don't count all things but dung for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ. These are the type of words that the apostle uses. It is really, God is calling you to Himself. Abraham, I think very early in his journey, learned that it was not about a piece of geography, a piece of land. Though that may be secondary, and a very strong secondary, but it was something else that was at the forefront. And that was God wanted a man for himself. God wanted a friend. God wanted a man that would think his thoughts. God wanted a man that would be interested in the things he was interested in. That God could plan and do things, and Abraham would become so involved in the affairs of God that it would affect God's very own doings. That God would make decisions or not make decisions based on Abraham's intervention or interference. To that degree, this man developed a relationship. We walk through this man's life, and so we would walk through Isaac's life, and we see there are so many parallels. Some of us here are just like Isaac. Our father was the man who, so to speak, left Ur of the Chaldees. Our father made some very clear decisions years before I was even born. A long time before I was born. I hear glimpses of it in his testimony as he shares it here or there. And I'm puzzling it together when I hear about my father's struggles. I can only imagine his Ur of the Chaldees. I can only imagine the idolatry he forsook when he was there. I can only imagine the talks that he would have had with his aunts and uncles, his brothers and sisters. I can only imagine what it was like when Grandpa followed him only so far on the journey, and whatever the reasons were, Daddy, what was it? Why did Grandpa not come all the way to Canaan? There's a sense in which you're Isaac here this evening, and things have sort of been handed to you on a golden platter. You had the family devotions, the Bible was read to you, and you've embraced the faith of your father. You are in keeping with it. You will go with it. But you cannot, in the fullest sense, identify with the kilometers, the months and months of traveling on foot, or maybe on camel, or maybe on donkeys, as they would pack. This is in the age before there was buses and jets and planes. This is in the age of sandals and dusty shoes. When you had a foot washing service, the feet were actually dirty. And they traveled. They traveled up the river all the way to Haran. And your father has told you, and you're captivated by his experience. But in the fullest sense, you cannot identify. In the fullest sense, you cannot identify. It is a story to you. Certainly you believe in the God that my father worships. And when my father erects the altar, you are there beside your father worshiping the same God he worships. And you're not pushed to it. You're not twisted. Nobody's twisting your arms. You're volunteering to do so. But yet your experiences are different. I suspect, as some of us sit here this evening, if we would read through the life of Jacob, we would say, that's me. I'm subtle. I'm a cheat. I'm corrupt. Mama and I, we do things together that do not please Dad. We pulled a good one over that blind man. Yet, really, deep down in your heart, you know you want the will of God. You know your brother Esau, he couldn't care less whether there is a God. Your brother Esau, he's a carnal man. The things of God don't click with him. Reading the Bible is not his thing. He'd rather go and do something else. He'd rather sit there on a tree and visit with his friends and talk about the latest buck he shot. But you're different. Even though so many times you're so convicted of your own corruption inside, yet you know you want the will of God. Yet you know you do. You know you do. I don't think Jacob was an anti-God. Oh, that man had lots of learning to do. And God was up for the battle, the match. Oh, Jacob did not know how corrupt he really was. He really didn't know. It would take years for him to come before God and say, Lord, that poor in spirit that we were talking about, it would take years for that to dawn upon that man. Where finally God had him. And you know that inner struggle where he was wrestling with the angel and they were going at it. Him and the angel of the Lord. Was it a theophany, you theologians? Was he wrestling with Jesus? Or was it just Gabriel? Who do you think it was? I'll let you muse on that one. At any rate, he came away a cripple. We know at the end of the day, the Hebrew writer tells us he was leaning on the staff. And don't you be silly now and think that that just meant that he had a walking problem. He had a walking problem. It's true. I can just picture him like this. I don't know. That's my take on it. And he needed that cane for balance. But when the Hebrew writer says he leaned on his staff, he was leaning on his staff, I believe that man had come after years of wrestling. That one battle there with the angel of the Lord that night is really what God had been doing with him for years. God had been wrestling with him for years already. And he had come to a place where he had realized what God had wanted all along, God got. God wanted me totally for him, and God got it. As an old man, he would say, like I read to you before, he said to Pharaoh, he said, few and evil have been my days. I meditated upon that few. 130 doesn't sound few to me, but I'm many years removed from him. So back in those days, I guess that was few. But he said evil. I meditated upon that, and I thought, what could he have meant when he said, few and evil have been my days? Maybe in that statement he was remembering the time when his brother came home hungry, starved. And he took that birthright from his brother. That was wrong. You knew it was wrong. He knew it was wrong. Everybody knew it was wrong. And Christians do sometimes nasty things like that. They know it's wrong. Everybody knows it's wrong. And they do it anyways. Don't you think you're getting away with that? Your day of reckoning is coming. Your day of reckoning is coming. Your pure desire for the things of God and the glory of God is so crowded, so covered by selfishness and pride that one would not even detect hardly that you're a Christian. You're a Jacob. You're a Jacob. I suppose maybe some of it came from his mama. Likely, must have been in the family. Because when he met his uncle, boy, did he ever find his match. Did he ever find his match? When he met his uncle, this was going to be a long 14 years. These 14 years. Don't you read those Bible stories and think they took place overnight. I'm going to get sanctified overnight. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if you could have the baptism of the Holy Ghost overnight and then you're eradicated from, what do they say? Eradication of the old nature? For most of us, it doesn't happen that way. We're going to have to meet Laban. Okay, young men, you'll meet Laban. You're going to meet him. And Laban is like you. He knows the rules. And when two selfish men meet, it may be 14 years of struggle, and you have only one wish: to get away from him as far as possible. But it's not true. It wasn't just trying to get away from him. He had not forgotten the promises that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Deep down in that heart, there was a burden for the things of God that were there nonetheless, even though he could do all kinds of corrupt things. But so as we peruse through these men, we see they are different, and yet, in some senses, they are the experiences in which we find ourselves. There are times where we may be like Isaac, say for example, and maybe we're blind. Maybe we're blind. I wonder, I have a sneaky suspicion that that blindness was a twofold blindness. There was a physical blindness. He was an old man, and something had come over him medically that was a problem. But as I read through that text and I muse upon it, I come to the conclusion that there was a laxness in his spiritual life. There was a letting go. I wonder if it had to do with those two twins that he had, and he had a bit of a favorite one that he really liked. And I wonder if he sort of liked the one that was more carnal. And he had a leaning and the one son that he had that was carnal and not interested in the things of God, he liked that one more than the other one. Maybe you're thinking I'm reading into the text. You read it yourself. But it's very clear that mom and dad in the story were not agreed upon which boy should be where. And I don't think it was right what Mama did with her son there. Quick, go out there and get a few lambs, bring them home. We're going to make this beautiful stew for Daddy. He won't know the difference. His taste buds are gone. His taste buds are gone. It's not the venison that he's after. He wants to give a blessing. And it's yours, boy. Quick, run, get it. Wow. What was God thinking when that event took place? What was God thinking when that event took place? But so we find ourselves sometimes as Christians. We're like Isaac, passive, nonchalant, blind. We don't see what's really taking place. Maybe it's been too easy. It was just sort of handed to me, Christianity, and I'm just, well, what do you call it? I've become sort of passive. I'm just there, sitting on a chair waiting for my sons to bring me a meal. Isaac did get the blessing, I'll tell you that. His daddy gave it to him. I have a suspicion when I read through the account, walk with me, you who know these stories. I have a suspicion the Holy One of Israel was not happy with that event that took place. That blessing, where would that account be now? Where can I find? We'll get to that later. I'll show it to you. Well, let me give you here 6 points this evening, so those of you who keep points. I'll tell you these stories. We talk a lot about what God is after is to build Christ in us, make us Christ-like. That's all true. It's all true. God wants you and me to be like Jesus, and He's still working on me, said the songwriter, right? Took Him 6 days to build the world, or form the world, create it all, and then He's still working on me. That's what we have here in these stories. He's still working on them. And He's still working on His Abrahams and His Isaacs and His Jacobs. In some senses, when you read these men's stories, you'll see that their stories, there's a lot of parallels between them. For example, they come to this thing about your wife and her identity, Is she your sister? Is she related to you? Is she what? You know, how do you do this with the other kings there? How do I navigate through this? You see those type of things. In some sense, it's like father, like son. And it's a bit scary to tell you boys this, and girls, that some of the weaknesses that your parents have, I have a sneaky suspicion you'll be facing the same ones. Point number 1. A test of hunger. A test of hunger. Now, when I was reading through Genesis chapter 12, I noticed that Abraham obeyed obeyed God in heaven, right? And he left Ur the Chaldees. And then he built his altar. You'll follow Abraham through and Isaac. Jacob not so much, but at least Abraham and Isaac, you follow their life through, and setting up altars was just a normal phenomenon. And building the altar was a sign of worship. So you build this altar of rocks or wood, and then you lay your animal on there, pieces of it, and it was generally, there was meals there, and there was fire there, and there was blood sacrifice there, and there was hearts being directed to God, to Jehovah. And so that was very common. So that's in favor of all of these men. You can see that even with the younger one of the three, Jacob. Even, remember his pillow. When he got up that morning, he had to put up something that would catch his attention, that I was in the house of God. I was in the presence of God. That somehow setting something up. And worship is a part of the Christian's experience. An acknowledgement of God. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths, said the psalm writer. But you will notice in Genesis chapter 12, it's not long. We're in Canaan now, and they came to the land of Canaan, and then all of a sudden what's going to happen? A famine is there. A famine is there. You read that there, starting in verses 8 and down, or 7 and down, in the book of Genesis chapter 12. And this man had lots of animals, and if you understand farmers, you got to keep the animals fed as well as your wife. So you're not just stocking your wife's fridge. You have to see to it that the sheep have food. And so he's going to go and find land. I believe that was a test from God. I believe it is. The ultimate goal that God is after is that you and I would be satisfied with God rather than the food that comes from God. Did you catch me there? That you and I would rather have God. If it's a choice between the two, God or breakfast, I'm having God. Breakfast goes. This is a truth. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth from the mouth of God. You see that when the children of Israel exited Egypt, one of the first challenges on the road was a challenge of food. Did you ever notice that? This issue of where's the quails, the manna, it's an issue of food. We are creatures so dependent on our bellies to the point where the apostle could say what did they say? Their God is their belly? Their belly is their God. Did I get it right? Their God is their belly. I'll get it right yet. They're in Philippians chapter, what would it be? Chapter 3, most likely. And Abraham, of course, most likely, I suspect he should have cried to the Lord for wisdom and help. And I think he didn't do so. He just was wise, and he reasoned, and he made some good decisions, like a good farmer does. And down to Egypt he goes. And then you have this whole incident where he meets Pharaoh, and they have to lie about the identity of his wife. And this whole embarrassing story comes up about, Sarah, the woman, just being jerked around like that. And when the whole thing is said and done, you finally go back to Canaan where you came from, right? But it was not, life comes with decisions. And the decisions come, all decisions have their effects, cause and effect. And this one, you'll see later, brought somebody into the home that I don't think was there before. I think this is where they picked up Hagar on this journey. That Egyptian woman was not a part of his household before, and this would come back to bite later. As Christians, we walk through this life, and we have to make decisions, and we do make decisions, but not always are our decisions made with a full consulting of God, and knowing His will, and understanding His will, and going based on that. We're rational, we think we're reasonable, and we move forward. And many times we're not even alert enough to realize that this may have brought negative consequences, bad fruit, something into my life that will later haunt me. That's how it was with Abraham. In our life, we go through this. It's called a test of food. I'm going to follow that brother's example, give everything titles. It's a test of food. And we will go through that too. Now, it's very difficult in the land in which we live when everything is at your disposal and Mr. Trudeau's handing out checks so you can all buy more. But I suspect our day of reckoning is coming. I suspect our day of reckoning is coming. Yeah, we see as we walk through these men's life, you'll see there's a test, and then there's rationale. Sometimes there's God's promises as an intervention. Other times we have sort of an interposition where God jumps in, and you'll see, I'll point one out to you. In Genesis 13, you'll see our second test. And that is a test of wealth or materialism, mammon. It's closely connected with the next one. But you remember Abraham and Lot, they both had lots of stuff. Lots of cows, lots of sheep, lots of camels. These were no little farmers. And obviously wealth brings with it problems. That's the way it works. You read through Ecclesiastes, Solomon was a man who could tell a story on this one. He tells us lots. I just not recently, or not that long ago, I should say, I studied through that book. And he was one to say. That was my take. Money, property, stuff, it just comes with its headaches and its challenges and its temptations. And in the story we have, there was this issue between the herdsmen of Lot and the herdsmen of Abraham, right? And it's an issue of whose sheep will stay alive. Because there's not enough pasture for all of the sheep. So somebody's got to go. Some sheep have to go, or somebody has to go with his sheep. And it's again a test. It's again a test. Just like the last one, the test of food, it's a test of wealth. And in this story, it is a beautiful story that so brings out the character of this man Abraham, where Abraham responded in a way that you and I would all say, Lord, help me to respond to tragedies like this. Lord, help me to respond. He came out with a solution. He said, Lot, we are brethren. That's a good basis to start with. If you're going to have church quarrels and church fights, or brothers are not getting along, or sisters having their strives, let's start with that one at the start. We are brethren. Let's remember, we're family, okay? We are family. Don't get into this mood, he's backslidden, and you don't want to call him a brother anymore. And Abraham came to Lot that way, and he said, hey, Lot, there is more land than locally here. I guess we will have to. It only makes sense that we will have to divide, because how else are we going to take care of our animals? And they divided. And they divided. It was a very peaceful separation, I suppose. And maybe they even wept as they parted ways. Geographically, there would be quite a separation, so they would most likely not be able to get together every weekend and have church together. These guys are going to separate. And maybe they hugged and kissed each other like the Arabians do, and then separated. And there they go. Now, we cannot help, as we analyze this story, but bring Lot into this here. Even though we're talking about the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, we can't help but noticing these other characters that are in here, because they are in the story more than just a passing character. Lot becomes very important in the story here. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this. But as I said already to you this morning, I cannot help but notice here that when Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere. As Lot saw this land, I cannot help but think that the writer wrote that statement to give you and I a clue into the condition of his heart. Are you with me? It's a bit of a clue into the status of his heart. And a very sad one at that, which seems to develop. And as you continue to go through the book of Genesis, you say, are my hunches that I have about this man's heart condition, am I right? And by the time that man is an old man, you're like, that is a sad novel. That is a sad story. And I don't want to speak to any of us this morning or this evening here and assume that any of us here are Lot. But it is a real phenomenon. Happens all the time. Where the very people you are in church with, and you've been in church with them for 10 years, and you cannot help but notice a wandering eye that they have. And you don't want to be critical and judgmental, but you see, it does appear there's a wandering eye they have. There are things that are distracting them, and we can only predict where they will go. We may have to wait 80 years or more. Maybe we will die before we see whether I was right. But maybe that's not the point. The point is, will you be like Abraham? Right? Do you want to be like Lot? So it was a test of wealth. Certainly the trip down to Egypt, if you read the Bible, the narrative there is, it seems to suggest that Egypt was good financially for Abraham himself. So financially it was a good investment to go down, even though it had all these awkwardnesses with it. And you and I, brothers, we know that sometimes at the auction mart, or when the whole nitty-gritty goes down in the lumber store, or wherever we are, there are times where we are compromising, where we know there's a deep down conviction where I should not go along with this. But it did bring some financial success to this man. It was good for the wallet. Because when he came out, I think the narrative, the way I read the narrative, there's a clue that both of these men multiplied as a result of that trip down there. But remember, I told you they brought Hagar along too. She came along too. So the first one was a test of food. The second was a test of wealth. Our third one is a test of fame. A test of fame. Fame and fortune. Money makes you famous, gives you position, gives you status. See, we have this scenario as we read our Bible here. We have these kings that are introduced to us. This Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Eliezer, Shadaloma, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. You have these men introduced to us, and we really don't know who they are. We have to read a lot of books from outside Bible sources to clue in that this could be, okay, could be, I'm one of those Bible readers who do that. Anyways, they were kings from far away, and these kings came down and they fought right in that location where Lot lived. Oh, be careful where you live. You may get somebody coming and plundering all your wealth, and you get robbed, and you're bankrupt. You're poor physically, but I don't think Lot learned a lesson. He never became poor in spirit, in the fullest sense of that word, as we were talking about it earlier this week. I think there was times where he became poor physically, but it didn't change his heart. But the bottom line, the thing I want to share with you this evening is Lot got, can I say kidnapped? What do you call it? The whole bunch of them in Sodom and Gomorrah got taken away. And all their stuff got taken away. And this was a test again for Abraham. Here we go again, another test for Abraham. This is in our life this way too. And you could have this illustration, they left our church, let him, if he got taken away with those people, that's his loss, right? He left our church anyhow. He was interested in cash, and let him. Abraham never had that attitude. I let you know. He loved Lot to his death. He was committed to seeing Lot walk with God all the way through. When Abraham got word that Sodom and Gomorrah had been captured and plundered and ransacked, and what other word can I use? Sodom and Gomorrah was in big trouble, and Lot was not there anymore. Abraham, as a man of faith, got right to it and brought his brother back, right? He brought his brother back. But that was good. That was good. God bless you, Abraham. You have a good heart. You even care for those Christians who are not in your local church. That's wonderful. You even care for those Christians who are half backslidden. God bless you. You have a good heart. But the test is on. What if they're going to want to make you famous now because you did this heroic deed? You did this wonderful deed. You're a hero. With such a few men, you rescued all these people. Let's everybody, 3 cheers for Abraham, right? And the temptation's on for fame, for the crown of glory on your head. Let all see that I am a faithful man. We can identify. We are there with Abraham. We find ourselves there somewhere. And I believe God in His great mercy likely God saw a weakness in Abraham's life, and I think that was the reason He sent Melchizedek there as an interruption. There's no temptation that has overtaken us but such as is common to man. There are temptations that come our way by the nature of how the events unfold in our life. It's not that we did something to bring pride or fame into my life. It just was the way things unfolded. And most likely we would fall if God would not divinely intervene. And I think that's why Melchizedek came there. And Melchizedek was a priest of the Most High God, and Melchizedek blessed Abraham. He did not come there and warn him, "Whoa, Abraham, whoa, 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 whoa." He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth." And he took Abraham's mind away from the day's event, away from the day's battle, and he took that man's mind and put it right where it belongs. You follow? Abraham, the test of fame. And of course, it is, we like it when they pat us and notice us and tell us they like us and what else? But we're Would to God that we want God only. And this is where God is moving to. God is a man of faith, just like you are here. And we're on this journey, and there's a test of food, there's a test of wealth, and there's a test of fame. Now I want you to notice the fourth one that I wrote down here. There could be more. These are my musings this evening. A test of posterity. A test of posterity. When you get older, you realize that if I have no children, it all dies right there. That's the end of it. It works the same way in the church. We realize that if these young people here, if they do not embrace the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if they will not walk with Jesus Christ, that's the end of our church. We know that. Those of us that are older, that's a sobering thought. For Abraham it was, God had come to him and promised him a child. And it had all this connection with the future of Christ would come, the Messiah would come. It was the multiplication of the seed of Abraham. There was a lot at stake here. And it seemed God had given no sign that God had not backed his word. Right? God had not backed his word. You know, in chapter 15, verse 1, we read these words, and after these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abraham, and God said, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And verse 2, you see immediately the thing that's really on Abraham's mind. The thing that's really, really, really on his mind was, excuse me, what about this son you said I would have? Abraham was realizing that scientifically he was getting to be old, and it's been proven that old people normally don't have children. And Abraham knew this is where we're going. And Abraham was wrestling with God over these things. There was these things were upon Abraham's mind. There was this test that came. And sometimes the hardest test that you and I will face, we are tripped up by the people closest to us. By the people closest to us. In Abraham's case, it was his wife. It was his wife. The lady in the house, Hagar, was there, and Abraham and Sarah were not having any children. And the two of them, possibly many a night, had laid there in bed under the stars and talked about it. And again, we're just humans. You reason these things through. You think them through. Maybe God meant this. How did God mean this? What's going on here? To make a long story short, you know what happened, right? You know what happened. I think it was a defeat. Abraham had a moment. I don't think this was a moment of unbelief. Now hear me now. I don't think this was a moment where Abraham was an unbeliever. But I do believe this was a moment where human rationale was really strong. Reasoning, being logic, thinking things through, and wrestling very hard in the mind, trying to figure things out. And that it does that to us sometimes, where we try to wrestle things through in our mind. And I don't know exactly what posture Abraham's heart should have been, but I suspect it would have been a good time to build an altar. It would have been a good time to build an altar. God had just come just the chapter before. This incident with where Hagar is brought into the picture is chapter 16 of Genesis. And of course, in the previous chapter, God had told Abraham, you're going to have a son. I promise you. And Abraham, the Bible even says Abraham believed God. But it was a test of posterity. And we face that. As fathers, we can get antsy. As mothers, we become disturbed. The joy and the peace in our heart is taken away as we look at our sons and our daughters and we see that they're not embracing, they don't love the Jesus I love. We look at our youth in the church and we see some of them walking away, and we see them going away, and it looks like, oh Lord. And we have a tendency to want to intervene and not cast it into the hands of the Lord and commit it unto the Lord. I know what it's like, where you'd feel like doing something to make it happen so that it will all come right. But you know, through all our failures, Hagar is brought into the story, and Ishmael is brought into the story. And they're not, again, just characters in there. I was reading this account today, and I don't know all about Ishmael, but sometimes in our doubts, in our wanderings in the land of Canaan, we do things and other people are brought into our lives and they many times have to suffer. Maybe I shouldn't use the word suffer. Can you help me? Like Ishmael, it was not his choice to be born in this situation, nor was it Hagar's will that she would have a son named Ishmael. And there she is brought into this whole thing, and the pain that it caused into that whole home for years to come. When that boy was 12, when Ishmael was 12, and then Isaac was born, and there they were together, one big happy family. No, it wasn't. These were Christians, and it wasn't just one big happy family. You'd think sometimes Christians are always one big happy family. Everything is always just, they always sing and smile and love each other. We all have our moments where that's the case, but some of us are wandering like Abraham wanders, and we end up with situations that are brought into our life due to our own mistakes, due to our own failures, due to our own sins, due to our own unbelief, and it brings with it consequences that bring with it, it seems, perpetual tears, heartache, and pain. I do believe this too was a test that maybe initially Abraham did not understand and did not respond rightly. But I do believe when Abraham was an old man, these things were cast into the lap of the Lord as well and given into God's hands, and Abraham died. He died a man of faith. He died a man of faith. He was a hero indeed. Yeah. Think with me. That was test number 4, right? A test of posterity. Let alone you and me being faithful, we'd like our sons and daughters to be faithful. I don't want my wife to doubt my King, my Lord. I wish she would love him the same way, with the same intensity that I love him. I wish my husband would love Jesus with the same intensity that I love him and follow him. And we pray for our sons and for our daughters that they would follow in the footsteps, that they would later say, the God of my father Abraham, the God of my father Isaac, and Jacob continued that faith. But we move on. We have, I didn't know what to call this one. We'll call it a test in relationships. Can we call it that? A test in relationships. When you walk through the life of Abraham, and immediately we can understand, this is very logical in our own experiences. Much, maybe all of our Christian life has to do with relationships. either the blessings of relationships or the strains of relationships. And certainly, Abraham was not exempt from this one. We see his devotion or his care of his nephew Lot. Yes, there may have been some relationship strains there between his herdsmen and their herdsmen, but I think he sought with all of his heart to not be at enmity with his brother. I think that with all of his heart he sought to be at peace with Lot and to not cause a fight, not cause hard feelings, not cause relationship strains. You know that that's a reality, and it's not always easy to have a relationship with someone without there being strains. Because we do come into situations in life where there is a crossroad, and we don't see it eye to eye. And neither one of us intentionally endeavored to make a problem. But here we are at a crossroad, and how will I fare? I am amazed when I look at this man. I already alluded or shared with you that story about how he rescued Lot after the capture of Sodom and Gomorrah. But even after that, when the angels were coming down and they were going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, you see Abraham's intervention. And I think primarily when he said to God, but Lord, what if there's 50 in Sodom and Gomorrah that are righteous? Would you burn it down to the ground then? And I considered the number. Consider with me the number he picked. I have a sneaky suspicion that in Abraham's heart of hearts, he gave that man's family the benefit of the doubt. And he suspected how many family members that man had. And he was hoping and praying to God that Lot's family were all on board with their dad. And they were still walking in the faith, even though they were making decisions that were contrary to the will of God, even though they were making a life's choices and moving in a direction that was not pleasing to God. I think when Abraham went and he picked a number, I think he suspected that if Lot's families may be multiplied to such quantity. But lest there's not so many, we go down in that number. And you begin to see, would not the God of all the earth do right? You begin to see that Abraham understood the character of God. That no, God would not. And he was, based on my knowledge of God, God, I'm asking you, don't burn her down. And it's a marvelous thing, that story, that wicked city, Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham was pleading for it. Do you think about that? So many times we have these attitudes where they have it coming. They deserve it. They are wicked Sodomites. But you here, who are children of Abraham, we have the heart of Abraham. We intercede. We plead for Sodom and Gomorrah instead of asking God to burn it down. Instead of asking God to burn it down, we wish them to be saved. And this was Abraham. Here he had his relationships. We talked about him and his wife. It is clear from reading this story that Abraham and Sarah loved each other. And I think they had a good marriage. I think Isaac, their marriage was rocky. You read that story. I think their marriage was rocky. And that may be the same case here. Some of you may have some marital strains like Isaac and Rebekah. It seemed to have been a match made in heaven. Beautiful courtship, right? Daddy was so involved in their courtship, so helping them through, find a wife. Daddy looked for a wife that was compatible in the faith. You know, it seemed all things were just right. But even there, I don't know how they fared all the way through. The Bible doesn't tell us everything. But I think when they brought Hagar into the home, that woman and that Ishmael, I think that caused some strain between Abraham and Isaac. There are sometimes things that we bring into our home that cause conflicts in our marriage. And I remember for my wife and I, years ago, we were so involved in other people's lives. And there were so many conversions taking place. Many times youth, your age, were converted and their parents were not. The earlier years of our marriage, we always had one or two youth living full-time at our house. And I remember one time, I was so burdened to help them and disciple them and help them walk with God that it was causing friction in our marriage. And I remember one time counseling with Brother Mose about it and sharing him. I gave him a bit of a rundown of what's going on in our home. And he made me do the hardest thing I ever did. I'm glad I did it. I thought for sure Hagar will never believe in God if she has to move out. No, it was never a relationship like that. But we had some sisters staying at our house, and it just seems they were not getting along in the kitchen. Have you ever been a woman? You know what it's like. So it works for some sisters. When they're with other sisters in the kitchen, it's one thing. But for some reason, there was a few of them, it just did not click. They could not decide who's the boss in the kitchen. They could not decide how things should be run off in the kitchen. And I remember Brother Mo saying, well, instantly, do it right away. Don't waste one more day. Ask them to move out. I thought, pardon me? There was no hesitation in his mind. He said, do it. Oh my, I went into my prayer closet. I said, how can I leave them stranded? Where will they go? I did all I could to call other brothers in the church and telling them, Brother Mose counseled me to do this. This is a hard one. Those poor sisters, they need a home to live in. They can't go back to their parents. It's a living nightmare where they come from. Their father is... Anyways, I did it. I asked them to leave. Now today, just for your information, that one particular sister and my wife, they're like this. They are the dearest of friends. Maybe it's just better to be separated. Anyways, it worked out. But I'm telling you, relationship strains come on the journey through the land of Canaan. There are just relationship strains that come. And there are things. You will face your Abimelech, brothers. You will face your Pharaoh, and there will be relationships that will come that you're not sure what to do with and how to relate to this whole thing. I wish I had it written down here. I should keep better notes. I had a scripture I was going to read to you. That was that one where he's with Abimelech. It was Abraham had that test again where he went down to see Abimelech. And he reproved Abimelech, I think it says. I thought that was an interesting one in thinking about relationships and Abraham. I think him going down to Gerar there with Abimelech, that was just part of his journeying. But in his journeying, he met this man Abimelech, and they took same thing as with this Pharaoh, and he brought Abraham or Sarah into his house. And then, of course, God stopped all the wombs in the house and plagued the house of Abimelech. And he's like, gives the man his wife back, and there you go, take care. Why'd you lie to me? Why'd you do all this? Why couldn't you just be upfront and truthful with me? And Abraham said, well, I thought I thought there was no fear of God in this place. You know, when there's no fear of God in people's hearts, you have no clue what they will do. And Abraham was again reasonable and rational and trying to be smart. But it brings with us strains. You read that account. I think it's in chapter 20 of Genesis. And you see there was relationship strains there. There was Ishmael Abraham loved Ishmael. He loved Ishmael. I think there was he latched onto that boy right from young up on. And it was hard for him to let that boy go. It was hard. It was hard. It was one of those things where his wife said, she's out. She's out. It's almost like it's either she's out or I'm out. Pick which one you want in the house. I will not have this boy be heir with my son, even with my son Isaac. Ishmael will not inherit. And I think the last time in taking Hagar, he had followed through with his wife's counsel. And I think there was a pause in Abraham's mind. And it was God that came to Abraham. And this time God said, you know, Abraham, you listen to your wife. And you send that woman out. And you let her go. And he did. But you can imagine in our journey as we walk through our lives as Christians, we face these type of situations. Some of them are heart-rending. Some of them are heart-breaking. And some of them we don't know what to do. But they are part of us growing. They are part of us wandering through Canaan land. And they are the experiences that we will go through that God is allowing to come into our lives. They are not accidental. We are not fatalist. It was not fate. It was not just chance that it was this way. God is sovereign over all, and God marvelously navigated and moved these circumstances so they would walk this way. They would come out this way. There are no accidents, people. There are no accidents. It was not a coincidence. God wanted Abraham to see it was God that led this way. You remember I read to you my closing verse is there in Genesis 48, Jacob's testimony. But how are you doing with your relationships? That was our fifth point here. How are you doing with your relationships? Are you getting along with your mom, your dad? Are you getting along with your brothers and sisters? Is it cats and dogs in your house and they haven't decided who's the cat and who's the dog? It's just skirmishes and fights. How are you making out with your wife? Are you loving each other? Are you caring for each other? What's your relationship like? How would you rate it? If one could say on a scale of 10, 10 is high, it's perfect, it's a beautiful relationship, and 1, it's a living nightmare. We can hardly get along. If the doctrine of divorce was okay, I'd take it. God forbid that it be that way. How are you getting along with your brothers in the church? Can you pray with them? Can you look them in the eyes? Have you come in your heart to a place where you have decided, or you can appreciate them, I should say. You can appreciate them. Do you see their gifts, their contribution? How are you doing with your relationships? We talked about the test of food. Lord, help us to bring our body into subjection. Lord, help us to realize that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. We talk about wealth. In this world of having lots of money and it flows easy, they talk about economies going down. They talk about this and that and the other thing. Meanwhile, we're still eating as if there's no end to this. The smorgasbords are just keep going. McDonald's on every street. We just eat nonetheless. Money we have, we spend it. We bought it. I built a new house. And on it goes. But you know, we're real people. Our third point was a test of fame. Jesus thought it not robbery to be equal with God. Is that not how it says? But he took the low road. He took the low road. Became subject unto death. Yes, even the death of the cross. And then we have this test of relationships, or the test of posterity was number 4. And our test, number 5, was a test of relationships. And number 6, and our last one here, Genesis 22, a test in fearing God. A test in fearing God. You got your baby. You got your boy, Abraham. God gave you signs that you are accepted of Him. You believed God, and righteousness was imputed to you. And it came with evidences in process of time. There was evidences that you could not deny that God is in your life. You got your proof that you're a real Christian. You had doubts whether you were a real Christian. The day came when the proof was taken away. There seems to be some fruit to this. There's evidence that I'm a real Christian. I can see it. I can feel it. I understand. And now I know God is in my life. God has given me what He promised to give me, and there I can hold it on my lap. Him on my lap. I can tell Him the Bible stories. And I can tell Him that He is a gift from God. And the boy is growing. The boy is growing. But the end, see, I think to a degree Abraham was still short-sighted. The end that God had in view, the end in view that God had was not to give you a son. Okay, that's it. Now we can go home. Case dismissed. The end in view was for Abraham to come to a place where there's nothing, no idol. Every idol I resign. Every idol I resign. Where Abraham would have to take a knife to his only begotten son. This was a place where all logic breaks to pieces. You could reason going down to Egypt. You could explain that trip down to Abimelech. You can explain how you got Ishmael. A lot of logic. A lot of things can be logically explained. You've come to a place where you saw the workings of God in your life, where God showed Himself strong. God brought things into your life that you were clear were from God. The doubt has been removed. You believe in God because God has objectively, not subjectively. The subjective has been removed. In an objective sense, you believe in God because He has so clearly manifested Himself to you. And then comes this confusing story in Genesis 22. And God tells Abraham to go to Mount Moriah and offer him as a living sacrifice. Offer up your son. I don't think I'm, by no stretch of the imagination, I think I have moved at least a degree away from reading these stories as children read Bible stories. But I don't think I fully grasp the maturity of this man. The maturity of this man, his spiritual perceptions. His senses had been so exercised to discern good and evil. He was qualified to have such a challenge. God had worked with him in his life. God had brought him to a place where God could put the test of all tests upon this man's life. And he passed. He passed. You read that account there in Genesis 22. Oh my Lord, that is... Would Abraham actually do it? And all from eternity past, God had designated a lamb that would be caught in a thicket, that would be there for this moment. And God said, "For now I know that thou fearest God." Now I know. Now I know. Now I know that you fear God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. So many men I know, And we walk through our Christian life and we have these journeys. And men have to go through experiences. We all have to go through experiences. It is a life, it's a journey in which we are being sanctified. And by that, I simply mean it is a place where God is drawing us wholly to Himself. I know when I was a young Christian, I sang that song, Wholly Surrendered, and both of my hands were up. And I remember the joy, the tears in my heart as I sang that song, and in myself I felt, from the bottom of my heart, I felt I meant it. And I did. I did. Little did I know that years later, as I would read through these accounts, I would become horrified that I am just like Jacob. I am just like Jacob. That man has been such a consolation to me. I don't know what would happen had God not shown me this, that you're where this man is. I'm taking you to Laban's house. I'm taking you to Laban's house. And I saw that I was the one. I was not a lie. It was real. I laid my head on the pillow. It was a rock. And I know I did. I laid my head on that pillow. And I know it was a real experience. I saw the ladder. And I saw the angels. You follow the allegory, right? I knew that was me. And I knew I had come that far. And when all of a sudden I realized the greater part of my experience is yet ahead of me. Because I just woke up. And I put my rocks there and said, Bethel. And some of us, we go through that experience. And in one sense, I mean not to scare you. Maybe some of you see yourself like Isaac. He did live a long time yet after he was blind, right? You realize that when you read the account. He thought he was going to die. Ishmael, get me some venison. I'm dying. I'm an old man. I can't see. I'm going down, boy. And no. More than 14 years later, when Isaac comes back, and him and his brother Ishmael are united. That's a relationship situation, right? Him and his brother are finally united. And Jacob had that experience there. He was wrestling with that angel. And finally, he said, bless me! Bless me! Abraham had learned that I need more than daddy's blessing. I need more than that blessing that daddy gave me. I want Jehovah to bless me. And he cried out to God. He cried out to God. And God heard him. And they wrestled. Genesis 27, verse 37. I want to read to you a verse there. Genesis 27, 37. Remember this here. This is in verse 35. You have that word subtlety there. And then you have in verse 36, is not he rightly named Jacob? Subtlety, supplanter, trickster. But look at verse 37. And Isaac answered, Esau is there pleading, Daddy, a birthright for me, a blessing for me. And the book of Hebrew tells us he cried. And it was loud. He cried. Esau had messed up. and there was no return. You and I, there's even the potential of you and I being an Esau, being so careless with the things of God that we come to a place where you can't reverse. You can't reverse. But Jacob said here in verse 37, behold, I have made him Lord. I have made him thy Lord, and all his brethren. That's what Jacob said to Esau. Esau vowed to kill the man. Jacob's on his way back from Padan Aram. And he's scared and he's terrified of his brother Esau. He's terrified of his brother Esau. The man that he was a lord over, right? What kind of a lord is that? What kind of a lord is that? Because Jacob realized, I need the blessing of the Lord. I need God's blessing upon my life. I must live with a clear conscience before God. I must learn to surrender entirely to God and learn to do things God's way, not my clever ways. Not my clever ways. And that night, by the river, Esau bowed. Esau bowed. And he became Israel, right? Esau bowed. And he became Israel. I walk through these stories, and what's my objective in a message like this? I wish us to come in our mind to be resolved. Maybe you look at these three characters that we have read here, and you're thinking that's a poor application to my life. I'm not there. But I do believe that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I do believe as we walk through the lives of those men, we find ourselves in similar predicaments. And we see that their life is in a sense a shadow of my own. It's a shadow of my own. Tonight, you are Abraham. You're Isaac. You are Jacob. That's you tonight. The question remains, when it's all over and you're old and gray, will you say what Jacob said? Read with me again in Genesis 48. Remember, he is now an old man. And now we're down in Egypt. We're down in Egypt. And I believe Jacob is speaking on behalf of the three. And they have passed the test of food, the test of wealth, the test of fame, the test of posterity. And they came to a place where God was their gaze, God was their fulfillment, God was it whom they sought. And he says these words in Genesis 48. I think it was there that I was reading earlier today. In verse 15, Genesis 48, verse 15, God, that's the way our life ought to begin, and that's the way our life ought to end. God. That's what I want you to take away from here. It's God. That's it. God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk. These men are given to us as examples. They walked a walk, and their walk talks still to us today. I pray you will look at these men and you will say, they are my fathers. I'm a son of Abraham. I'm a son of Abraham. And I will also walk before God. Will you walk before God? I will walk. God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk. The God which fed me all my life long unto this day. And it's more than just that He put a meal on my table. God has become my diet. I eat His flesh and I drink His blood. If you do not eat my flesh nor drink my blood, you have no life in you. You have no life in you. He fed me all my day long, unto this day. The angel which redeemed me from all evil. The angel which redeemed me from all evil. As an old man, this is what he would say. To Pharaoh he said, few and evil have been my days. I think in front of Pharaoh, he was reminiscing back to all his failures and shortcomings, the times where God needed to discipline him and chasten him and birth or create faith in him. But here, before his son Joseph, he says, the angel which redeemed me out of all evil. My prayer is that that would be your testimony. That's my burden, that be your testimony. That you would walk before this God, that He is in your eyes, He's in your presence, you are in His presence. You walk before this God, the God of our father Abraham and the God of Isaac. And that becomes a personal testimony of you, that you can say, the God of my father, Abraham and Isaac. My father, Abraham and Isaac. That God has fed me. He's the one who sent His angel. And I have a suspicion, I wonder if He's talking about that angel that He wrestled with. And He's talking about redemption. Think with me, you theologians. Who redeemed Him out of all evil? The man that injured his hip. God bless you all.